Welcome everybody. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. As you're joining the channel here, you'll be placed in silence mode. However, please post your question in a Q&A section. This is a live panel discussion, so feel free to be as interactive as you can. We will draw one winner to provide a one-year access to our VIP community. That will be done at the end of the day. So it's from the people that post question in the Q&A. We'll get started in about a minute. So a couple of disclaimers. The session is being recorded and will be available to view on demand. If you do not wish to participate in the recorded sessions, you must disconnect now. So once again, you'll be placed in silence mode. Feel free to leverage the Q&A. Also, the social channels. We may or may not get to all the questions. However, if you post stuff on Twitter or LinkedIn, leveraging the hashtag IoT World Day, we'll address them with the individual subject matter experts. So thank you for joining and welcome to IoT World Industrial Cybersecurity Day, part of a series of events that IoT World does to support the October Global Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I'm Lucian Fogoros. I'm one of the co-founders, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining. Thank you our speakers. Thank you our sponsors, Tempered for this particular session. And I'd like to turn it over to Sanjay Kumar, who would moderate this session.
Oh, yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, the world is joining from. So welcome. I'm pleased to have a distinguished panel with me for the session on best practices for ICS security in various industries. Looking forward to a great dialogue and discussion. And as Lucian said, we welcome your participation in Q&A. So if you move on to the next slide, here's our agenda. On slide 4. Excellent. So I'll go through panelists' introductions. We have some poll questions to get your responses on. We'll have a couple of them. There's some questions I'll be asking the panelists, and certainly as your questions come in, please put them in. We'll answer those questions as we go. Hopefully we can cover and address all your questions, and then we'll close with some remarks from all the panelists. So let me go ahead and share my screen, Lucian, and I'll cover just an introductory discussion on what we're going to talk about today. Give me a second here. So let me start with some perspective on information you may have seen or read about on different points of view on how the C-level looks at industrial IoT and digital transformation. This study here certainly talks about IoT being a competitive differentiator. How many agree the adoption will increase? There's a certain amount of uncertainty. There's some uncertainty on where to begin. But one of the things that here, obviously, you see on the right are what are the big reasons for why IoT, industrial IoT, is still not adopted the way we would expect it to. And cybersecurity is certainly on the top of that list. So we'll talk about what are those best practices in cybersecurity where you and your organization embarking on this journey can learn from this. Let me share a bit about myself. I'm part of Siemens Advanta's solutions and consulting organization. I lead the discrete manufacturing team, and my background has been in plant automation, started working in PLCs and automation systems, have done work in system integration, consulting, and then recently getting more involved in helping clients understand where to begin, what are the ways to look at industrial IoT and drive outcomes, and certainly look at end-to-end cybersecurity. Some of the areas that I get involved in from a cybersecurity perspective range from helping clients in assessing their portfolio, their posture, all the way from risk and compliance to security operations, helping clients deploy and integrate, how to manage and adopt cybersecurity and IT/OT integration. So a little bit about myself. I'm based in the Metro Detroit area. So with that, let me hand it over to Brian.
Thanks, Sanjay. Can you hear me? Thumbs up me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, my name's Brian Skeen. Nice to meet you all. Good morning or good evening. I have a background building products. I've been building products for IT for about 15 years, all the way from the beginning of F5 when there were just a handful of, 4 developers and a few other people. And when I left, we had about 5,000 employees and about 100,000 customers and $2 billion in revenue. So I rode the different incarnations of F5, and I have, for the last 6 years, been working on an opportunity to try to build better products for industrial control systems and OT to apply some of the things that we have learned. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dragos.
Del, you're next. So I went order of slides. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's
No
okay.
worries.
That's okay. So I'm not Dragos, sorry. But we have a great Dragos coming up, so don't worry about that. So my name is Tal Ben David. I'm a VP of R&D and Engineering at Karamba Security. We're a software company that builds seamless IoT cybersecurity solutions for a variety of industries. If you can move to the next slide, please. I'll talk about myself and about what we do. So we provide cybersecurity that goes into the IoT endpoints. As a company, we started out in the automotive market, and we have a lot of customers and a lot of engagements within automotive. But in the last 18 months, 18 months ago, we expanded to many other, to the general IoT public, and we are now engaged in a variety of solutions for IoT in the wide sense, in enterprise devices, in surveillance cameras, in medical and paramedical devices, energy sector, industrial controllers, and so on. You can see some of the customers that we are working with that have been named publicly, so we can name them. There are obviously others that are not. A few months ago, we announced reaching a milestone of agreements for 12 million devices with the Karamba protection within them, and it's growing since. With regards to what we are offering is we are actually providing an umbrella, a portfolio that envelopes the development lifecycle of the IoT products. Providing a risk posture analysis for the images during their development, adding security controls seamlessly into the devices to add hardening and runtime integrity on the devices themselves in a variety of platforms and environments, and providing operational ongoing deep insights monitoring into security indicators and risks coming from the devices in the operational phase, then with an ability to integrate that into the OT SOC or IT SOC or wherever the customer wants to integrate that. Personally, myself, I come from around close to 25 years of experience in software development, with historical cybersecurity experience from Checkpoint Software Technologies, and one of the co-founders of Karamba Security. So
Great.
Pleased to be in this session. Very excited to hear other points of view and to share and then discuss this emerging very important topic. Thank you,
Great.
Sanjay.
Thanks, Del. All right, over to you, Dragos.
Thanks, and good morning and good afternoon, maybe even good evening, and really pleased to be here, especially among a couple of guys which are recognized across the industry, security industry. So yeah, just sharing a couple of things about myself. I have nearly 10 years of experience in the industry, in the security industry. Right now, I'm working at Digital 14. I'm a security director. I'm head of product security. And our company is basically working in different sectors, including public sector, but also areas like OT, manufacturing, and also we offer some cybersecurity advisory and consulting. Beside that, Digital 14 is mainly looking to create software and hardware products. So we tend to create ultra secure devices for different use cases and for different, I would say, scenarios for the public sector. So we deal with, I would say, pretty interesting security stuff, going from cryptography up to end-to-end encryption and secure communication. So looking forward to share some part of my knowledge also in the IoT industry, and yeah, also to debate together with my colleagues and be here to answer your questions. Back to you, Sam.
All right, thanks. And Danielle?
Perfect. Well, first of all, thanks for everyone for being here. As Drago said, good morning, good evening, good night, whatever it is for you. So from my perspective, I'm going to go very briefly on the company side, and I'm going to talk more on the third perspective, or what is it that I'm doing here. First of all, my name is Daniel Kapelman. I am a technical analysis manager for FireEye's cyber physical threat intelligence team, very large name. Basically, what our team dedicates to is doing research into threat actors, into their TTPs, what are the threats, risks, vulnerabilities in general for whatever we call cyber physical. In cyber physical, we englobe everything that has to do with basically operational technologies in general, and but mainly focus on industrial control systems and whatnot. So the first thing that I wanted to highlight in this sense is, like, from all of the research that we do, even though we go across different industries and whatnot, one of the reasons why I'm very glad of being here is that the perspective that we've been adopting is trying to make a leap from the traditional ICS security approach into more something that we call intermediary systems, which is basically the place where IT and OT interface. And we get to discuss more on these topics, like the one from this presentation. So in summary, I'm going to be here more and trying to bring up a bit in terms of the threat landscape, in terms of threats, attacks, vulnerabilities, and whatnot, and very glad to be here.
Great. Thanks so much, Danielle. So with that, we'll get into our poll questions here. I'm going to hand it back to Lucian to do the poll, and then we'll get into our Q&As. So Lucian, go ahead and post the poll.
Lucian?
I'm not sure whether Lucian is, maybe she's okay, yeah, going.
Okay, here's our first poll. There's 2 questions in it. So what's your role in the organization? Select one of the choices that are given here. And then the second part is, because this is talking about industry best practices, we like to hear from you on what industry do you represent. And you have a choice of 7. If there's others, just go ahead and click that. Give you 30 seconds to go through that poll. So while we're waiting, it looks like we have some questions coming in. We'll cover that as we go. Some of these we'll answer in the chat as we go along. Some of them I'll bring up during a session. Also good to see we have 80 participants, so that's fantastic. So our poll should give us some good view into who we are speaking with. Okay, so let's go ahead and close the poll, see what responses we received. Okay, wonderful. So we have some OT cybersecurity practitioners, IT security, service providers, other, okay, 42% other, that's interesting. So I'm assuming that's possibly non-cybersecurity roles. So if you're joining to learn more about cybersecurity, that's fantastic, that's great. From an industry perspective, looks like majority is manufacturing, energy, public sector, oil and gas, quite a few other, automotive. Okay, so other could be financial services and other industries. So yeah, if folks have answered other in these, the industry, feel free to just post in your chat what industry you represent. That'll be fantastic. All right. So thanks for that. What I'd like to do is, so our topic was about industrial control system security, but we also talk about industrial IoT. So maybe Danielle, if I can ask you for just to set the stage. I mean, there's some nuances when we talk about industrial control systems and IoT. Would you share a bit of perspective on what that means, the differences and nuances between the two?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. So we just thought that it was a very good idea to begin the discussion by framing a bit on this presentation. And the reason is why. As when you said, so for example, the name is Industrial Control System Security. But I mean, we're basically, if we're here, is because we're interested in the perspective of industrial Internet of Things, IoT. So just to separate, and this is something that probably most of the people around here might already know, but probably some of us might not be so much into the field in that perspective. There are two very different industries. Yesterday, I was presenting in a specific conference that was very ICS security oriented. And a lot of the perspectives that I see in there are more into the idea of we should be isolated. We should probably be, I don't know, avoiding any connections with, I don't know, basically any protocol that might enable us to do high scale production, high scale automation. We should be very careful in that, basically on the idea more of like still security through obscurity, let's keep everything separated. And then right now we're getting this group of people, including us, all of us present here, that are trying to do a very different twist where processes are becoming much more data oriented. That is very efficient. That is a great opportunity. It's going to be, like, it just simply brings great opportunities from production side. But I guess the big thing to start discussing here is what are the challenges that we're facing in terms of security? Because the main problems that we have in ICS security came from the moment when we started incorporating more and more process automation, IT, OT, convergence, and whatnot. So as right now we think about getting even more intensive in there, what is it that we're going to be seeing? And I think that that's the big difference that I wanted to make. And that opens a lot for why are we here and why it is so important and so exciting.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Danielle. So I guess what we'll do is, as our panelists, that sort of helps set the stage a little bit on what the nuances are. So as we go through some other questions, I welcome our panelists to highlight two elements. So one would be, in that context, IoT, and if you think about the ISA 95 stack, where does cybersecurity fit in the ISA 95 stack? We think about that. And also I welcome our panelists to provide their perspective on the industries that they represent. So let me ask, and the question always is, like, what are some of those challenges in securing devices in different industries, implementing these industrial IoT solutions? So perhaps, Brian, let me start with you. What would you say are the major challenges in different industries that you're involved with?
I think you're on mute, Brian.
Okay, sorry, I was telling somebody to not start a vacuum. I'm in a public place.
No worries.
Trying to get Wi-Fi. Could Sanjay, could you please just repeat that question for me?
Yeah, no worries. So the audience is interested. Yeah, so what are the challenges in the industry that you work in from a cybersecurity perspective?
The challenges in okay. So the challenges in the industries, everybody's got data. They have latency requirements on that data. And as Daniel just mentioned, there's a need, I would say it's a requirement to connect the data from these systems that were traditionally air gapped up into analytics can be performed, or visibility tools can get a hold of that data and detect threats. I think that that's just a reality. So I think he's right that you know, he mentioned security by obscurity, and I think you know, Tempered's case, we are promoting the idea of restoring a logical air gap. But the challenges are that these systems were built usually in a LAN or a local network that was in an air gap at one point, and now that is breached. That's one of the major challenges.
Great, thanks. Other panelists, Dragos, your thoughts on an industry that you're familiar with?
I can jump in, and I usually like numbers, so I'm going to start with some numbers. For example, there are 70% of vulnerabilities disclosed during 2020, at least the first part, that shown that this can be exploited remotely via some network attack vectors. And what this observation reinforces is basically that the air-gapped operational technology networks that are fully or totally isolated from cyber threats have become very, very rare. And that's why, because we are trying somehow to bring, you know, connectivity. Connectivity has its own benefits, and we don't need to think about security as a business driver. Security is not always a business driver. Usually we have other reasons why we are creating products, and we bring security because we want those products to be created and run securely, right? And then a couple of other things I would like to mention. Many industrial IoT devices still run Windows operating system, and this makes them vulnerable against like some traditional security incidents, like just WannaCry, right? That's a very probably common and sound one. What else? Maybe the fact that we are still using a couple of protocols such as maybe Modbus or Profinet, right? And these are protocols that lack security by design. So they were not created with security in mind, right? They don't have availability, or they don't have means to authenticate user, or sometimes not even to perform encryption. And last but not least, I really want to also mention about a gap into security professionals in ICS security or industrial IoT. Today, we are really facing a gap in this area, and we know a lot of companies are trying to improve by, you know, raising professional in this area. But today, at least, we still have some gaps. So even from the audience, if we have persons that are interested in this topic, I can assure you that's one of the hottest places for you to be in, at least in the next couple of years. So
Great.
That was my quick 2 cents.
Great, thanks. And let me ask you, Tal, I know you have experience in a number of different industries. So if you look at, let's say, manufacturing, automotive, healthcare, or embedded systems, where would you say, Tal, from an industry perspective, where do you see there are more challenges, one industry versus the other, or the challenges similar across industries?
Thank you, Sanjay, and thanks for the insights from the rest of the panelists so far. I think that, you know, there are, what we've seen, and we have, as you mentioned, we've been active and working with a variety of industries. There are quite a lot of commonalities, and there are also industry-specific aspects. So I think it's a combination of the challenges lie, you know, everything that was mentioned here, I can relate to that completely. But on top of that, I would sort of, as trying to derive general patterns, I would say that there is a combination of, on one hand, there are legacy systems, you know, with using legacy components, and you know, Brian was mentioning the fact that things were air-gapped, and suddenly, you know, somebody pulled the plug, and now it's connected. Wow. There's a bridge out there, and who's going over that bridge? Who knows? So it's not only that it became connected, but it's also using a lot of things. You know, many of these systems are updated on a low cadence. They use old operating systems, old components. You see vulnerabilities. We look at systems, we see vulnerabilities like 3, 4, 5 years old, and it's very, very hard sometimes to just update. So that's one common thing to many of these industries, and some of them are picking up. If you look at the automotive industry, it's been investing on one hand, it's been investing and learning and growing in this area for many years now. On the other hand, it is an industry that picks up technologies on a relatively slow pace, so it takes a lot of time until you pick it up, until you make decisions, until you add things in. We see this in other industries as well. Some of them are faster. We see players in the energy sector, and some of the renewable energies and so on that are moving faster. Some of them in the old legacy systems, in the power grid and so on, that are still picking up slower. So it's a combination of, I think, legacy practices, legacy systems. And I saw this somewhere on the chat where somebody was pitching in, saying there's a challenge with leadership buying. And I think that's also part of the issue, leadership within these organizations, especially as maybe the biggest challenge is that security in many of these environments and industries is an expenditure and not a revenue path. And justifying this expenditure is, in many cases, is not easy, because are we really being attacked? What are the risks? How tangible are they? These are all things that making your case with the leadership is not always easy, especially when every penny matters, and it's a big challenge. And maybe the last item I will say is also the tiered nature of these industries and these platforms is also combining into these challenges, where you have, if you are an OT practitioner and you're buying a PLC from a PLC manufacturer, you have the risk, but this is not a desktop. You cannot add security on top of it. So you need to get your manufacturer to be involved in that. That manufacturer sometimes is actually also acquiring components or software or elements from other tiers. If you look at automotive and other tiers, there are multiple contributors in this environment, and how to harmonize and sort of get all of this together with getting the right drives in, and making sure that there are the requirements, there are the answers from the manufacturers, from the different supply chain. So we start seeing regulators chipping in and starting to become more active in this space, but it's taking a long time. And I think the reality is that hackers are going to move much, much faster than regulators. And I think we're seeing that, in some cases, there are examples in all of these industries where you see things ranging from, some of them from white hat hackers, some of them from black hat hackers, in a variety of areas. And I think it's just going to grow over the next few years. I do think we are starting to see, the adoption is starting to be there. That's from our perspective. Acknowledgement is coming in, new types of positions are being developed in the manufacturer. The chief product security officer is a new entity that wasn't there a couple of years ago, that is sort of bringing the perspective of security to the product. So it's all happening. The pace, well, one could wish for more and push for more.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tal. That's great insight. I see some questions coming in the Q&A. There's some other things I want to cover a little bit here too. So let's do this. Let's get some more audience participation. So, Lucian, if you wouldn't mind, we have some more questions. There's 4 questions that will pop up that relate to challenges. So here we go. So sort of building on that topic on challenges, let's get some audience information, what they believe. A little bit about your cybersecurity expertise. Also, let's understand more about your environment, how many devices on the OT network, if you have an idea. We'll touch a little bit and understand more about how you're monitoring your IoT devices and controllers, what do you have in place. So let's go ahead and select your answers in, give you about 30 seconds. And certainly those who've answered your polls, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A as we're doing that. And I see some questions coming in here. All right. And we're about halfway into our session, so good questions. We have a lot more to answer and address. Given this topic is on an industry focus, so certainly if you have questions that are specific to your industry or have anything you'd like us to talk about, please put them in the Q&A. I see there's some good amount of dialogue in the chat also going. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and close the poll, see what responses we got. Okay, interesting. All right, so challenges in IT/OT organization. So some of our topics our panelists touched on a little bit. Siloed organization, certainly an area that we see. No common integrated tools, it's the highest percentage there. No single point of accountability, okay. I'm sure that probably is maybe different by industry, so that's good to know, not sure. Level of OT expertise, so we have quite a few experts and a lot of folks who are new to OT cybersecurity, so hopefully the session has been good for you so far. How many devices? The majority less than 100, few about 1,200K, more than 100K, 13%. Interesting. I'd be curious, if you're able to put in the chat, what would make up that large number of devices? You don't have to be too specific, but if you can give a little information on what those kind of devices are, what makes that 100K plus number, that'd be great. You're monitoring your IoT devices controllers. No security monitoring in place is 43%. Okay, so that is interesting. Security sampling some systems manually. We have OT SOC, small percent OT SOC in place or some planned. Great insight. Thank you for responding to that. So, I guess for our panelists, when you look at these responses in terms of challenges, accountability, monitoring, let me ask a question here around risk. So given what the audience is saying, given your industry background, maybe let me start with you, Danielle. What would be your take on an industry that perhaps you're most familiar with, on where the risks are from a cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity perspective?
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to compute the risk in general with the responses to try to relate a bit. But I would say the first thing that got my attention from the responses right now was the idea that there are no common integrated tools, and the idea that there are very few OT SOCs. Well, there may be many things to discuss in there to begin with. That is the fact that is an OT SOC needed or not in the beginning? It's already like something that's being discussed at the market level. If it is, which many people will believe it is, how would it look like? Because here's where it comes, what Dragos was mentioning, for example, that you have all the different types of protocols and you have like the different types of segments of a network. So right now, for example, there are siloed organizations that have like an OT SOC, for example, that might only look at what's happening inside the environment, like the industrial environment. But such an OT SOC, for example, cannot look at what happens in such a destructive case, such as a case of Trident, which is one of the large physically impactful attacks that we have seen. In the case of Trident, for example, actually, FireEye was one of the companies that responded to that, was that company that responded to that. And what we saw is that 90% of the attack happened through basically the full corporate network. It jumped the air gap, eventually got all the way to the industrial network. And just in that final portion, we saw the payload that was against the Schneider Triconics. So the safety instrumented system, to be very, very specific. So that last payload, one alternative for detection is to go after that last payload, and makes a lot of sense. But normally the approach that we take to this is more going after all the process that goes before, which tends to be much more similar to IT, but needs to have some understanding, some good understanding of what's happening on the OT side, so that you can tell where the attack is going to and if this is something that you should worry about. Something very similar is what we have seen with, that's like a destructive case, but we have seen this also with financial, for example, right? When we talk about ransomware, for example, that's becoming very important, for example, for manufacturing, for energy and whatnot. When we talk about those cases, again, we're seeing a lot of TTPs that are very similar to IT, and that right now we're beginning to understand like what are the actual implications in OT, and actually seeing financial actors that include in their payloads. For example, some of them had some process key lists that include some processes for OT. So we're seeing how it actually can go and impact the process in different ways. All that being summarized, one of the biggest challenges that we have, I feel, is that the fact that of how IT and OT are so interconnected through the full process, through a full supply chain, and how are we going to be able to either separate to look at the payloads differently, or to do that type of detections, you know, like in an integral way without messing up the OT, but at the same time without just going and looking at all the minor or like the data-oriented IT security perspective.
Great, thanks. I guess other panelists, your industry view on risks, some of in the context of what you heard from the audience.
I can also jump in. So I think we need to take, let's say, one step up, and we need to look about what the industry is about. So what we are trying to protect, because if we go back to the classic CIA triad, but now we need to add also safety there. Depending on the sector, for example, if I'm just giving one, the automotive sector, we are talking mainly about first, of course, safety of the passengers. And today we see that we may not even, to whom we need to prevent or to defend, maybe we are not even talking about hackers. We are now talking about security researchers. Security researchers are gaining really, really good traction. So on one side, they are they want to be in that hall of fame with like identifying some critical vulnerabilities, and I think some of you may know about the Jeep hack from 2015. So security researchers on one side, they do have a really good contribution to the overall security posture of the industry. So that's why I'm saying we need to look back to what the industry is trying to protect. And for example, as I said, in automotive, we go to safety. So we need to be very careful, even when you talk about manufacturing processes of the vehicle, because usually in this industry, the main focus is on the vehicle itself, meaning after you produce it, while it is on the street. So we don't spend a lot of, or we don't put a lot of focus on the manufacturing itself, like on the ICS components that produce those vehicles, because during that manufacturing processes, there are also cryptographic material or firmware that is being transferred to those ECUs from those vehicles. So that's why I'm saying there are areas that, and we need to think about it like the weakest link principle, because if you look at the entire vehicle and then you find one weak link, it's enough, only one weak link, and someone can somehow break in, can provoke you brand impact, financial impact, operational impact, and the most important, it can go up to safety impact.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's a good perspective. I appreciate that. Maybe Brian, on the topic of risks, your perspective a little bit, and maybe if you want to touch on elements like, do you see more attacks perhaps, let's say, on public industrial infrastructure or private industrial networks? What do you see from a risk perspective?
Well, I think the question of whether the public industrial infrastructure is going to be attacked more or the private industrial networks are going to be attacked more, I think the obvious answer is both. probably for slightly different reasons, but it definitely is not going to slow down, and where there's a will, there's a way. So if the networks are exposed to the internet, then they can be found, they can be exploited easily. Showdown, for example, zero-day attacks are going to happen. We talked here a few times about unpatchable systems. Somebody mentioned that, you know, some of these networks, the industrial networks, have components that are 2, 3 years old. And in our experience, in my experience, some of our customers have things that are on the network that have been there for 20 years, 15, 20 years. And they were put in they trust everything, basically. You know, even if these networks, public or private, are air gapped, there's social engineering, there's human contact with the network. Phishing may compromise those networks. If somebody has special access privileges and all the systems we have in place to try to watch that and prevent those types of attacks, they have flaws as well. If physical security needs to be breached to attack something and the incentives are there, then absolutely, yes, that's going to happen. And the key is to harden these environments and assume that the answer is yes, they will be attacked. Another point is somebody has mentioned also that we can look at, so I like what Drago's just said about the weakest link. It's a layer of an onion. So what we're doing is we're always peeling an onion. There's a weakest link in a car that has been deployed to the street and I'm driving it. You know, first of all, I don't want it to reboot on the freeway. Second of all, you know, if some data is being exfiltrated from the car, maybe I don't know about it and I don't know that I could be harmed. But let's say we solve those problems, then at some point, even during the manufacturing process, you know, so that's a private industrial network has been attacked, then somebody may have put in, you know, some kind of a rootkit may have been put in the system, something to gum up the works at runtime to be activated 2 years later. So I just think that the first answer has to be yes. The trends are going to be an increase of attacks because obviously there's a renaissance of innovation in attacking these systems, and that part of the answer needs to be to put systems in place to thwart or to slow down the spread of these attacks.
Great. Thanks, Brian, Bill. That's a great answer. I appreciate that. All right. So let me see what questions have come in. Want to pivot a little bit towards this question here that came in. It says, what do the panelists think are the approaches solutions for encrypted connectivity for large spread out industrial environments with manufacturing, movement of materials, facilities, as today's VPN solutions seem costly at scale?
Can I jump in? Oh, sorry. I'll take a short answer here, and then I won't take up too much time. But I would say, you know, VPNs drop you off at the edge of a network and let you go wherever you go, and then it depends on maybe another system that's being configured differently, different policies to get you to where you need to be in that network. That's just fundamentally going to be broken every time. So I just wanted to say that. Go ahead, Drago.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to start with mentioning that VPN is not quite end-to-end encryption, meaning it's point-to-point rather encryption, like from my PC to a server. But there are a little bit more stuff about how you want to reach or how you're able to reach end-to-end encryption, but I don't want to detail right now. What I wanted to say about new technologies, there are a couple of new technologies. They are called the low power wide area network, the LP1. And the LP1, these new technologies, again, they are wireless technologies, but they are focused more towards the IoT devices and the way they can connect and communicate way more easily, and they can scale up. They can yeah, you could have even additional like higher speed. And just to give maybe one example, NB IoT is a really good example of the LP1 technologies, and it offers really good security advantages. It wasn't designed for security purpose, but taking into account that it was developed just a couple of years ago, when the ones that developed were thinking about security when they did it, right? So it was developed with security in mind compared to others, including Wi-Fi. By the way, Wi-Fi was not developed with security in mind. It was an addition on top. And this NB-IoT provides encryption, provides authentication, so provides everything you need from a security perspective for your IoT or industrial IoT devices to communicate, right? So it depends also on your use case, because as we know, Wi-Fi or LP1, you have some proximity constraints. You cannot communicate, or the distance matters, right? So if you are talking about a perimeter, then we could be using these types of technologies. If we need to communicate from one station to another, or from one location to another, we will still need to use this type of end-to-end or point-to-point encryption.
Great.
If I may add, Sanjay, just a short
please.
addition on that. So yeah, there's so first of all, with regards to VPN, and I think combining what Brian said and what Drago said, just as a general, architectural point of view, you can think of there are VPNs, as I think Brian mentioned them as point to point, or maybe it was Dragos, meaning you're connecting two networks with a secure channel between them, but then there's something going on inside the network, and that's like the site-to-site VPNs and so on. But there's also the VPN, which is like point to point from the endpoint to a specific server, using things like TLS communication and things along those lines. And I think it's, from an architecture perspective, it's something to consider within a specific network or architecture. What's the right thing to do from a scalability, from a performance, but also from a risk assessment point of view? Because I think one of the things I wanted to point out is that there is, in some cases, we see sometimes there is a kind of an underlying belief that encryption is the one solution that solves everything. And I think that's something to kind of keep in mind, that encryption is not a silver bullet. First of all, you have to make sure that all of the crypto materials you're using are really secure and done properly and so on, and that it's actually solving the right problem. So sometimes you're saying encryption, but you mean authentication. Sometimes you're saying, encryption traditionally is there against eavesdropping. But even if you do have encryption and everything is good as in place, you still have legitimate protocols that are activated on top of your encryption, and those protocols reach the end devices, and through those protocols there could be vulnerabilities in the protocols going through the encrypted channel, and you still might have compromises in that aspect. So it's important to use the right controls and measures for the right reasons. And I think doing a good threat analysis and threat assessment of what are your threats, what are you trying to protect against, and what are the levels of risks are important in choosing the right measures of controls, whether they are encryption, whether they are additional different types of hardening on the endpoint level, on the network level, and on the back end as well. So there are multiple actors in this and multiple facts, and I think it's one of the things is to make sure you're taking all of that into consideration when building and identifying what are your highest priorities of what you need to build in and what you need to protect against.
Great, thanks. And I think that's good.
Just
go ahead.
One note from my side. The question was more towards Wi-Fi, right, and this type of communication. But we are missing from the discussion the 5G, because if we take a clear example like autonomous driving or a smart city, we have plenty of IoT devices, or we will have plenty of IoT devices there, and the way they will communicate, or for certain safety impacting use cases, 5G is currently the solution. And even though this will mean that the devices will need to have, like a cellular modem and so on, it means that we will need to adopt it just because, one, it provides really, really good latency. And again, latency, I'm referring the response time between how long it takes for my command from one device to be transferred to the other, right? So that's latency will be very, very important. And secondly, we are talking about really good security built into 5G network. So again, 5G should also be taken into account for the communication for IoT or industrial IoT. It's still a little bit early because it's not, the adoption is not great and there are still issues, and it's still somehow expensive and difficult to integrate all of those I would say 5G antennas, because the proximity, it needs to be like one at around 200 meters or something like that. So there are still some issues that will need to be fixed, but I really want you to think about 5G also as a future technology that can ensure communication in IoT and industrial IoT.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good point. Thanks for that, Rekos. So we have about 10 minutes left in our session. There's a few more questions that have come in. So I'm going to build on a couple of questions that have come in here. One was around importance of implementing IoT security in multiple levels, end-to-end, and I'm assuming this is in reference to, we look at all the IC95 levels, whether it's the cloud, your IoT platform, your SCADA systems, your devices, gateways, depending on what you're trying to address. So that's one element of question. There's also, I guess, related to that from a solution perspective. So I'm going to fold in a couple of questions together. And let me maybe ask you, Danielle, your thoughts on implementing security at those multiple levels, and then perhaps touch on, from a solution perspective, what would something like AI play a role in implementing security at those multiple levels? We'll start with you, Daniel.
Okay, so first of all, I guess the first one is a fairly easy response. In general, that's the like the main recommendation from security, which is establish security at different levels whenever feasible, at different levels of segmentation, and different levels of what you are basically using. You're going to have to be implementing different type of security controls. And one important thing to remember in there is that oftentimes we might think that relying on a specific vendor might just be the solution. But oftentimes it's not only about the vendor, it's like original equipment manufacturer. It's not only about us, but it's actually about the combination and the work of both sides. So one big example that I have there that goes pretty much in line with the conference in general is cloud security, right? In general, cloud right now is being implemented in a lot of different environments, for example, for checking all the information from sensors, packing it back, for maintenance, for alarms on assets and whatnot, right? Those cases of cloud, for example, when you see the disclosure on the equipment manufacturer, what it says is actually what they call the shared security model, right? That is basically, I keep the cloud secure, that's my problem, you keep the rest secure. And so from an actor perspective, it's very difficult to go and basically launch a massive attack against one of those vendors, but it's very easy to go and do it against your organization if you're not monitoring all the traffic that comes inside and outside of that cloud and that is happening between the different devices. So that being said, yeah, my quick response to that is you need security at different levels, and it has to respond to the specificity of the process and how much you rely on that for the rest of your process, right? So for example, if you lose access to data that is required for automated maintenance, might not be such a large problem as long as it doesn't go and affect like the entire process of when you're going to do maintenance or how it's going to work, right? It might help as a recommendation, but it should not be entirely reliant on that. And that is also part of the response to the second question that was basically like what's the role, for example, of this type of solutions, of this type of technologies in general that we have, such as AI, machine learning. In this case, we're talking cloud, virtualization, and whatnot. Since they are so new, it's very interesting. We definitely have a lot of opportunities there for security, but also we need to be considering the challenges, right? So What I would suggest in that sense is to use all these resources as complementary in the security process. But in the end, the core thing for security is always having visibility into your network, knowing what your assets are and what they look like, knowing what actor or not actor specifically, what threats you're facing and what is critical for your process. And then in the second term is using any of these technologies to come and, for example, improve your level of detections, your first layer of detections, to go and analyze the behaviors of your devices and see if anything is going wrong and whatnot. And I'm going to stop there because I know we're close to the end and want to give more time to the guys. But yeah, that'll be my response.
Yeah, no, thanks, Daniel. And actually, I was reminded our session does go to 15 past the hour, so we do have some time. So we have a bit of time to respond. But certainly, other panelists, your thoughts?
Yeah, just to tag onto the back of that, I think detection and understanding visibility in the network is really important. I think applying pattern matching to the data and the operations, the behavioral characteristics, the communication patterns is very important. But also we need to, I think we need to apply zero trust principles into the network. That's very, very hard to do, especially across vendors. I would acknowledge that right up front. If you have to integrate many different layers and different systems, then that is going to be extremely difficult. But there are ways. That is a very active area of innovation right now. And from what I've seen, it can be done.
Okay, I can also jump in. So there are basically, I would say, two questions which can relate between them. So first one, yeah, layered security defense is anyway one of the basic principles in security. And what I would suggest here, assume your product is vulnerable, even though you think it's not. Assume it is vulnerable. That's how it works. And then when you assume it's vulnerable, then you are going to think, okay, this layer is going to be broken by a hacker, let's say, right? So what other layers do I still have in place in order for me to protect? Then you go to the next layer. Assume that one is also broken. Okay, then go to the inner one. Usually it's good to have 2, 3, 4 layers, depending on the use case and depending on what you're trying to protect. And then second, related to AI, usually AI, of course, it's used in order to process really huge quantity of data. That's really important. And the way I think AI helps in security is by preventing or trying to identify at least 0-day vulnerabilities. We try to outrun the bad guys, and the way we try to do that is by identifying those malicious behaviors. And just giving very quick example, like I have 2 applications or 2 IoT devices that are sending 1 megabyte of data daily. From, let's say tomorrow, those 2 IoT devices are sending 1 gigabyte of data, right? So an AI, maybe even a less sophisticated tool, but we are talking about AI, an AI is able to identify just because it analyzes the behavior. So that's why AI has a place here, because it can eventually outrun the bad guys. And I'm talking here about even really nice solutions like cyber twin or the digital twin concept, where you somehow create a copy of your firmware or software and you are scanning it like daily against even the dark web, against publicly disclosed databases with vulnerabilities. So there are things that you can use and concepts that AI can bring, and you can enhance your security posture.
If I can, may I add to that, Sanjay?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I think the notion of visibility and monitoring the IoT devices and the IoT world, let's say, is important, and it's emerging. I believe that one of the challenges here is that there's a couple of challenges here. That one of them is related to scale. And we're talking about amounts of devices that scale up. We saw in the poll in the beginning, organizations that have more than 100,000 devices, and we're seeing more of those. We're seeing fleets, let's call them, of a million and more devices, and more than that. Think of an electric grid that is distributing smart meters to consumers in a country. You have millions of those. So the challenge of scale is a big one, which spans the entire flow. It's how to scale on the device, and also the economics of it cannot be the same economics that apply to analysis of enterprise networks. If you look at an enterprise network that is analyzing endpoints and desktops and servers, those are different economics from the millions of devices that you need to collect. The economics in the backend are different on processing, on storage, and so on. You need those devices to be able to, you need to apply tiered architectures where you have edge components, edge gateways that can take off part of the load. Maybe some of the devices themselves can do some of it, do smart collection. All of that is crucial to get visibility and monitoring in these types of network. And on top of that, from the other perspective, and I mentioned that before, but it's also important to remember that again, that there are differences from the IT world, and one of those is that you don't have the privilege of doing an incident response and responding to the device, going to research it, finding what's going on, or and take measures and add some things on the device. You need a lot of automation there, and you need the devices to be, and I think Dragos mentioned that before, as hardened as you can. They need to self-protect. They need to actually on that front, the fact that these are relatively, these devices are less prone to variation. They are usually not devices that are manually changed or configured or added components and configuration. They have rigid configurations and software. That's an advantage, and that advantage needs to be leveraged so that those devices can be more strongly hardened. The example that Dragos gave is a good one, because the behavior of sending 1 megabyte of data per day, which suddenly switches to 1 gigabyte, is something that is more uniform and more standard on these types of environments. And that's a point to leverage for the different solutions. Now, again, the economics of adopting these solutions, of making the investment, needs to be successful. And it's a matter of motivation. It's a matter of resilience to attacks. As attacks will become more frequent, the need will become stronger. Regulators are chipping in, so it's a process. I think the people on this panel are aware of this challenge and are picking up on the need. But in the wider decision-making forums, it's still something to push for, and as an industry, it's something that needs to still pick up and become stronger and more evident, and with larger investments, I believe.
Great, thanks. No, I appreciate that. That's a great way to address the topic. So you touched a little bit about industry. I guess it leads me to the question that came about standards and certification. So the question here about what companies are doing to address requirements for authentication devices with certificates and root of trust. Are we seeing an industry adoption of these traditionally IT cybersecurity practices in OT? Who would like to take that? Brian, we'll start with you.
Sure. So to things definitely does not work out of the gate with OT. And there's also, not to mention, there's a huge, shall we say, a culture difference, and the people involved have different, different worlds. And I was on a panel 6 months ago with Joe Weiss, who is very vocal about this. IT coming in, not really understanding the behavioral aspects of the OT environment, not really understanding the mitigations that could be performed in that environment, and bringing technology that was built for human to access mainly client server applications, things learned in the client server world, bringing that to the OT environment. Now, security policies, you mentioned certificate and certificate management. So establishing trust is hard. And one of the things that we haven't really talked about here, but I think is one of the biggest challenges of everything here, is how do you establish what should talk to what? I mean, we can watch things, we can detect things, our AI can look at the common patterns and maybe detect even 0 day, but trust needs to be established between things. We need to apply the zero trust principles, and these are not IT principles. I mean, these are new principles. I mean, in fact, they apply a lot less to IT client server applications than they do to OT. At least in OT, you know what your devices are, and you have a chance of figuring out a positive security model where you start with default deny, and then you start adding in trust between things that you intend to be able to communicate. And I think that that is really key to it.
Great. Other panelists, your thoughts, point of view?
Yep. Can I?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, I think I just wanted to mention on top of what Brian was saying, and what I find very interesting in here, and this is, it's also, I mean, it's personal thought. It responds to what we've been seeing with the organization as well and whatnot. But I think that one of the big challenges that we're facing here is that like embedded idea that we have that basically either we're talking IT or we're talking OT. So for example, if we're talking authentication, then you should be thinking in one way. If you're thinking about the other, then you're going to go and do OT. If you're going to do one, you have one certification. If you have the other one, but oftentimes the professionals that we see that tend up to have like much more success, for example, on the field whenever they go and figure it out and whatnot, for example, from our consultants, is people that actually get to grasp a bit of both worlds. So that being said, I think that a lot of the problems that we're seeing here between like whether it's IC, whether it's NIST, whether it's one or the other, the challenge here is that we need people that work not only on one of both sides, but actually try to understand. So you understand the OT perspective, what the device is, how it looks like, what it is used for, but at the same time has the capability to think more in terms of like typical data problems, such as the ones of authentication, such as the one as encryption, of secure communications, of whatnot. And like the last thing to mention here is like one of the examples that we have is that when there's one of our consultants that recently did some publication on one of his red teaming engagements. And basically the most interesting thing from these reports on the red teaming engagement that we start playing the organization, we see how far we can go, is that oftentimes we use the most common IT techniques for exploitation in the beginning, like basically cracking weak passwords, basically cracking authentication, things like that to actually get into the environment. So I would just advocate for that, trying to get a bit of the best of both worlds, which I feel is what's missing with all of these type of regulations, standards and whatnot.
And maybe just to add also here, so don't think that having a regulation, it means that your organization is 100% secure, because usually I'm not saying they're bad, they're really good, the regulation, and I really want to have regulation probably in all the industries. What I'm saying is that you will see regulations are a bit high level. So it doesn't tell you how to do encryption. It doesn't tell you how to do authentication. It just tells you, okay, you need to have these basic security principles. In some regions or areas, they go a little bit deeper. But what I wanted to enforce is that there is no size fits all. So usually what you need to do, take the regulation, apply it to your organization, but make it tailored to your organization. So don't take it word by word, rather see whether there are multiple regulation or best practices, and try to do your own framework that is fit for your organization.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts on the other panelists? Okay, I have a couple of the questions come in. This one actually was on our list of topics, and let me get this one, and if we have time, we'll try and wrap up the other questions that have come in. So obviously, privacy is always a topic of conversation when it comes to data systems, perhaps from the panelists. And I think here, there's two elements it would be useful to hear from the panelists on. One, from an industry perspective, what about privacy protection? of personal data or privacy in general when it comes to cybersecurity, and given the specific industry, and we talked about a little about automotive manufacturing, energy, maybe healthcare is another area. So let me, maybe Tal, start with you. Your thoughts on privacy in the industry perspective?
Sure. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic, because it's very, I think it varies quite significantly in different components in the industry, because a lot of the areas and the topics we were discussing here, and there was safety mentioned before, a lot of the controls and the risks here are not related to privacy, because systems these are machine-to-machine systems, these are controllers, PLC, and they don't have a lot of privacy-related, personally identifiable information and so on. However, many of the industries and the vendors in this area are actually picking up and expanding to service-driven elements, and trying to expand their revenue opportunities and so on, and they are creating services that come through some of these platforms. So maybe you see it less in a PLC, and you might see it less in an engine controller in your vehicle, but you might get more of that in an edge gateway, or in other devices, or in your infotainment system, where suddenly you are getting all additional services, and then people may need to may put their private information, like credit card information, or some of these systems will be able to monitor monitor your location, and monitor if they have sensors, and maybe they have voice sensor, they might be listening or recording things that are being said, or cameras that are taking pictures of areas and people and so on. And sometimes these areas are indeed overlooked in the area of privacy. I think there is a combination of aspects, and there is awareness is starting to grow. There was one kind of surge around that when GDPR regulations were sort of being released, and awareness to privacy around GDPR was becoming stronger. I think it simmered down a little bit. And I believe there are two aspects here. One is actually explicit privacy elements, where identifying as part of the threat and risk assessment of your devices, identifying elements that are privacy oriented, such as video streams, such as images, credit card information, and so on, and taking direct measures against those. And on top of that, there is the fact that other than protecting the data, the entire flow and aspect of your devices need to be taken into account, because even if that data is protected and has measures, we are talking about, in many cases, about systems and devices that are not in secure locations, and the compromise of the device itself might impact the ability to manage and to actually maintain that privacy control. I think this is still the way, from the perspective that we are seeing, this aspect is still in early stages, and still the awareness of what elements are actually privacy oriented are still kind of I would say something that is not very common and not very strongly embedded in the processes, at least in some of these industries, that this is a new aspect to. So I think it's the awareness is starting to grow, and it will become part of the overall cybersecurity view, where privacy is part of that, but there's still a way to go.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tal. Great perspective. Really appreciate it. So I know we're about to close the session. So what I'd like to do, perhaps start with the remaining panelists and come back to you, Tal. Maybe just 30 seconds. Danielle, your perspective on privacy and any quick closing remarks?
Okay, I think on privacy, I'm gonna be very brief because I totally agree with Tal. It depends a lot on industry by industry. It is definitely a challenge, and it is very interesting that we're starting to look at that. I would prioritize those industries where safety is a priority, which tend to be more in this case specifically of IoT. But definitely privacy is something that we should be starting to speak about right now, mainly, for example, in healthcare or those type of very intensive data industries. And in general, just as an end thought, thanks for everyone. I really enjoyed having this talk with everyone, seeing all these different perspectives. And I just want to remind everyone that what we're discussing here is nothing that's been fixed. So every time that we do this, it's very interesting, it's very important. And I would love to continue getting engaged on all of these discussions. Thanks for everything.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Vegas?
Sure, just a closing note from my side. So the IoT, especially and industrial IoT industry and adoption is in our future. So it's just a matter and a question, how secure do we want this adoption to be? How proactive do we want to be? And let's not wait for the bad guys, right, to outrun us. And again, there is a skill gap. So whenever you feel that you're thinking about where to invest your time, and maybe even hobbies, think about cybersecurity. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Brian?
Yeah, and I would just say, great comment, Dragos. I'd also say there's an approach gap, and we need to also bring the vendors, OEMs, we need to help and do innovation so that people across the board can implement this. I've been in lots of environments where I've seen some things that don't match at all what principles we're talking about. And we're talking about every industry that you've mentioned so far, including hospitals where the cafeteria network is connected to the diagnostics network and packets are flowing between them. So I think a difficult thing for this entire topic is that security breaches are secret and it's difficult because nobody wants to talk about it. But we need that data to figure out how to fix it. So anyway, thank you for the panel. It was a real pleasure to work with you and great questions from the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And Tal, back to you, closing comments real quick.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Thanks for moderating this, beautifully. Yeah, so I would say, picking up and maybe on what Brian said, I think there are, in these industries more than in others, there are multiple layers of actors involved, from the buyers, the OEMs and manufacturers, and the supply chain of tiered products, and all of them need to come together, and there needs to be, I think, powers that are pulling and pushing from both directions to take us to the next level, because there will be a tipping point where these devices become, hacking and cybersecurity is a matter of motivation and economics, and there will be a tipping point where things will go there just because of the scale and availability, and all actors, I think, need to come together. It's happening. We all need to come together to make it happen faster. And I'd like to thank the panelists and the audience. I learned from all of the comments and all of the questions, and it was a true pleasure to take part in this.
Great. Yeah, thanks, folks. Appreciate it. Great to work with the panelists. Thanks, Lucien, for hosting this, and thanks to all the attendees. So back to you, Lucien.
Thank you all for joining. Next session is going to be in a separate link. So it's cybersecurity, architecture, governance, starting literally about a few seconds now. So thank you. Look forward to see you throughout the day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.